Hello and welcome back to our BNI San Diego podcast. I'm so excited. I have a very special guest, someone who has become near and dear to me, Crystal Privett. Crystal Privett is a business coach, a mindset coach, the queen of crystal clarity, which I absolutely love. Welcome, Crystal. Thank you for joining us today.
What a pleasure to have be here with you, Ed. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, it's I'm excited. And not only is Crystal a business coach, a mindset coach, she's an author, she's a speaker, and she's also just joined our director team here in San Diego
Yeah,
for BNI, which I'm really excited to have you on the team. And with all your experience and one of my favorite topics is always about mindset. So before we get into the thick of what we're going to talk about, Crystal, share with our listeners a little bit about you and your background.
absolutely. So they do call me the Queen of Crystal Clarity because I actually had a life of pain, trauma, and sexual abuse that I turned into becoming a 7-time best-selling author, featured on New York Times Square, and helping individuals and businesses on a global level. I help individuals just like you with my book, Crystal Clear Mindset.
There it
Great
is.
plug, Ed. I
It-
love how
it-
you're always have my back, and I love how you do keep mindset at the front of your topics because mindset is very valuable, not just within BNI, but within the world.
Especially right now with all the things going on in the world. We just had an election.
Yeah,
On whatever side of that coin you're on, your mindset is going to be key in how you move forward.
exactly.
Whether it's politics or business or your professional life, your relationships with individuals, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, children, everything comes back to mindset and how we look at the world, how we interpret the things that are in front of us, which I love. That's why I love the title of Queen of Crystal Clear Mindset. It's just awesome. It's perfect for you.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's part of it is like finding who we are and being authentic in our purpose and in our passion and our voice, because people can tell the difference when you're
Mm.
not being authentic. When you're living in your truth, it becomes crystal clear.
And what you just did is you positioned us for our next podcast because I love that topic that you just talked about, right? The uh um yeah, it's so incredibly important to be authentic. And in business, it's really easy to lose that authenticity because we're trying to either promote ourselves or to look good in front of people. And I love our topic for today because this is kind of leading right into it. Crystal, what are we going to talk about today?
We're talking about the value of vulnerability.
The value
So,
of vulnerability. What a mouthful, right? And for some, this could be a tough topic, so don't check out. Please listen in because we're going to talk about the advantage of being vulnerable.
exactly. Oftentimes we might not realize because we have this new shiny object syndrome, and a lot of people are trying to put this really polished version of themselves out there. But what people oftentimes don't realize is sometimes it's the worst part of your story that's going to help you really connect with other people. A lot of times we're putting this beautiful image and talking about all the great things in life, but I think we miss the step of vulnerability when we're not being authentic and not really expressing, because there's no leader that's going to get to the top without challenges, obstacles, conflict resolution. These are all skills we build because we go through it. And that's essentially, part of mindset is finding those things that could set us back, but taking that choice to say, I will not be defined by this. I choose how to define myself.
Well, and as you said, which I really like, is in your vulnerability, it actually attracts you to people, right? It draws people in because let's face it, when we go to a concert, when we go to see maybe it's a speaker that we love or an author that we're going to meet for the first time, there's that element of awness, right? And oftentimes when we're sitting in the audience, there's an element of disconnect because we can't relate to them, right? Because we assume that their life is perfect. Like we want to, that's what we strive to be like.
Absolutely.
However, when we're able to be vulnerable and authentic, that's what creates that connection with people because now I can relate to you.
Not everyone can relate to success, but
Oh,
everyone can relate to pain and despair and challenges.
yeah, waking up and just not waking up in the best mood, or I had a flat tire before my, walking into a key meeting, or, just those elements of life, right?
I love
Whether
that you said that because, like, every morning, every single person that wakes up, 80% of our thoughts are negative and 90% are a repeat of yesterday.
Ooh,
So it's, are you going to allow yourself to kind of be stuck in this residual energy of the day before, or are you going to take active steps and use resources and tools to snap out of that negative manifestation loop so that you can be more positive? Because, like you said, what happens that day that you can't find your keys and then you stub your toe and then you spill your coffee? The rest of the day, you're just like, get me home. I cannot take another minute of this because, like you said, you're attracting more of what you're thinking of. And it's probably on a subconscious level, not a conscious level, because clearly you don't want to be frustrated, but that's what's happening.
so how do we move through that? And not only how do we move through it, how do we move through it and then have the ability to share and be vulnerable with someone and actually be willing to or transparent enough to say, you know what? I just walked into my meeting. Thank you guys for being here. I'm excited to be with you. And you know what? My morning didn't start out this way,
Yep.
right? How do we bring in that element of vulnerability into our life, into our business? And again, I also want to be careful because we can be so vulnerable that it
Mm-hmm.
can actually be like, whoa, it's like
Mm-hmm.
detracting,
Yeah, there's a
right? So
balance.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's important to understand that the first step becomes with the awareness,
Mm.
because sometimes we are just listening to our brain and not really realizing that not everything our brain says is true. It's more about cultivating it like a garden, like pulling out those negative weeds. When a negative thought comes into our mind, or we do spill our coffee, and it's like, okay, I have a choice here. I can allow myself to go this negative route, or just being present for just a moment and recognizing the fact that you have this precipice where you could go one way or the other. And I like to do this little trick that helps me out when those situations arise. And it's taking whatever emotion it is. So, like, let's say, Ed, for you, what would it feel like? What emotion would you have if you spilled your coffee and you couldn't find your keys?
Frustration. And
Okay.
and and for me, I am things show up on my face.
Mm-hmm.
You can see how I'm feeling.
So, what's the opposite of frustration for you?
Calm or joy.
Perfect. And that's great because everyone's answer is different. So for you, like, let's say you're in one of those situations where you just spilled your coffee and you don't know where your keys are. and you
Probably
have
this
a
morning.
and you have a podcast to get to in 20 minutes. Take that emotion. So yours was frustration, and take the opposite of the calmness and the joy. And you're going to take just 60 seconds
Mm.
to visualize this positive emotion like washing over you like a warm shower,
Ooh.
picturing that positive emotion soaking into your skin and soaking into your cells and into your memories. So you're essentially neutralizing this negative emotion with the opposite of it. So taking the time to find out what is triggering you, what emotion is bothering you, finding the opposite of that emotion, which would be how you would rather feel, and then taking a moment, because They did this really cool study, Dr. Jeffrey Fannin, on the human brain and the process that I train. And they found in 17 seconds, whether you're thinking of something good or bad, the chemicals in your body begin to change based on what you're
Ooh.
thinking. And then in 68 seconds, the cells of your body begin to change based on what you're thinking. So in 68 seconds, if you think of something really positive, you will be able to neutralize that negative emotion and then be able to go on with the rest of your day without it causing a huge incident. I was actually at a gas station and I saw a man open the back of his car, and it was a family. They were clearly on vacation, and every single thing fell out of the back of this minivan, and it was like things broke. You could see just like a avalanche. And I pulled him to the side. I said, just a second, the rest of your day is going to be ruined if you don't just take this moment with me for just a second. I pulled him to the side and I'm like, okay, what do we want to feel? And he was able to go on with the rest of his day and not let it ruin his life, his kid's life, his wife's life.
Oh,
There was a positive ripple that just was taking that moment.
well, and the opposite of that is if he wouldn't have taken that moment, that ripple would not have been positive. It would have been that cascade of frustration, anger, whatever the moment is, that goes right into the minivan and it
Mm-hmm.
impacts the rest of their vacation.
Exactly.
So how do
So,
we, I like that. Where I struggle sometimes is in the midst of it, right? When you're frustrated, how do you, what's that trigger, or what is that element that can say, okay, you know what? I'm just going to stop here for a second, or I just need to go outside for a few minutes and go for a walk,
I
right?
have
Getting out of
one.
that
Yes.
moment.
So, like I said, like the awareness is first, because sometimes when we're getting it starting to build, we don't even realize it until it explodes. So, like starting to catch it early,
Mm,
you'll start to notice it more when you start to pay attention to it more. And then once you pay attention to where your energy is going, and you're able to cultivate it a little bit more. So, if you're having a negative emotion, yes, you could think of the positive, but also just the awareness of it begins to shift it into where you want it to be.
I
So
like
the
that.
the awareness is really where it starts.
Well, and it's from that you can actually turn it into a habit, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be those first couple of times, it's not going to be immediate. But I would imagine that over time, it becomes quicker and quicker, and you learn to get back up and smile again quicker.
I have a great analogy for this. It's kind of like our inner voice is a little bit like a teacher. It's like kind of like the classroom teacher. But do you
Yeah.
want it to be that teacher that's like screaming at you and yelling at you? You didn't turn in your homework. You're behind on this. Like I've been waiting on this to be submitted. That's a lot of times how we talk to ourselves, and we
Yeah,
don't
I would
really
agree.
realize it. But there's that kindergarten teacher that's like so encouraging. Like, you can do this. I believe in you. You're so close. Just a little bit further. Look how far you've
Mm.
come. Look at the difference in those energies. Even your face, I could see it calm down. It's like, okay, like talking to ourselves in a positive way is not something we're not necessarily taught. It's something as adults that we need to go in and cultivate, because our brain changes over time. When we're young, our brain is like a country road. There's like 20 ways to get to where we want it to go. As we get older, those roads, kind of the ones that we're using, are the ones that stay open. And so some of our pathways, our neural pathways, get lost or unconnected. So we
Ooh,
really can feel more like ourselves when we do the mindset work, because you're really regaining a connection that was a part of you. So you can feel the way that you want to feel. If you've gone your whole life with anxiety, you
ooh.
may not want to feel anxiety. You've probably tried everything
Oh
to get
yeah.
rid of the anxiety, but it's still there. You might not have a neurological pathway that takes you to the opposite of that emotion. So we
Mm,
build you a pathway, and then you can feel that way again, because situations, times, as an adult, hardships happen, and our brain starts to think that more hardship will happen unless we cultivate it into, it's almost like tricking our brain and how we want to feel instead of how we currently feel.
And I think that's a skill that and a muscle we need to exercise, right?
Exactly.
It's going to take time. So with all that, going back to that topic of vulnerability, let's take that and now how do we bring this awareness now and learning how to kind of stop the cycle and kind of take a moment to breathe and visualize that I love that calm and peace coming over you. How do we share that, or how do we become vulnerable enough with the people around us that may need to hear that? Because I think oftentimes, at least for me, I think I'm the only one that, had a bad morning. Everybody else's morning has been fantastic. But, mine was, again, woke up, stepped on something, kicked the dog, went out and there's a flat tire, all these things. And then we get into our work day or our business, or maybe it's at the end of the day and we've had a really hard day. And
Mhm.
before we step into the house to greet our family, and recomposing ourselves. But then how do we meld in the element of vulnerability and to share that and show it so that to the point where it's not overwhelming, right? We talked earlier about that, learning how to
Yep.
balance the vulnerability so that it in turn it impacts us in a good way, and what we're pouring into somebody else is that element of you're not alone. I'm going through this with you.
Exactly. So finish the statement. You're only as strong as your
Thoughts?
weakest link is
Well, okay.
the yeah. So wherever our most vulnerable
Mm,
aspect of ourselves is where we should really be tuning into self-growth as a character building um, process, because the weakest part of ourselves, if we take those weaknesses and vulnerabilities and turn them into our strengths, that is when we take our life to the next level. If
mm,
we're struggling with communicating, that might actually be the one thing you need to focus on. So by, like we said, shifting your awareness, knowing that's why traffic lights are great. Sometimes we don't really realize where we're strong or weak in an area. So by tuning in and saying, oh, wow, I was a green, but now I'm a yellow. I need to focus on these two things. Those are vulnerabilities that can be improved, and that will take us to the next level. Just like our business, BNI is great for this, because when we have a gap in our process, there's someone in our group that can most likely fill that gap. And if they're not in our group, they're in the chapter next door.
oh
So
yeah.
yeah, vulnerability is amazing because it really comes not about trying to be a victim with your vulnerability.
Mm,
What it is the vulnerability to be, like you said, authentic. There's ways that we can connect with someone that if we walk around acting like so cool, I'm better than you, I'm so tough, no one's going to want to relate and connect with that, because most likely people are feeling isolated. People are feeling like they want deeper and more meaningful relationships.
yep.
People want true, authentic connection. We've had enough of the fluff and the shiny objects. I think people are craving the real.
Ooh, there is a powerful statement. People are craving the real, right? The real you, the authentic you, that vulnerability that we've been talking about. People really do crave that.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many times, whether it's in business or our personal lives, that we want to put on the face like everything's great, everything's okay, not realizing that by being open and vulnerable with someone, we're actually doing them a favor as well.
I gave a speaking engagement in Utah, and because of some of the sexual trauma that I have started speaking about. This was a really interesting speaking engagement because there were lots of people there, and it was a very diverse crowd. But as I shared my vulnerability, I looked around and I could see the tears just pouring from everybody's eyes. And most often, you think that it's just women who are willing to and find this vulnerability. But the men at that engagement, the men that came up to me afterwards that said, I had something happen to me too. Nobody's talking about this. I haven't had an opportunity to ever tell anyone that I was a victim too. These men need emotional safety and security as well. As women, we have a little bit of an insight that we need that emotional security and safety. As men, I feel like there's a little bit of disinformationing happening where it's like, oh, you've got
Unfortunately,
to
yeah.
be so strong. And
Yes.
as a mom of teenage boys, I would love to reject that theory and tune into what their vulnerabilities are, tune into why they're struggling, because men have just as equal emotions, and we honestly need to honor them as
What,
well.
why is that so difficult for us as men? I mean, and you made the point, right? It's for women, it's a little easier.
Mhm.
Not necessarily all women, but for,
But women struggle with boundaries.
oh, there you
So
go.
there's a even exchange usually, but it's different. So just like in BNI, I'm sure every chapter has certain things that they struggle with, but
Yeah.
then every chapter has unique challenges too. Yeah, there's like a bond in both. There's a bond
Mm.
in knowing that part of us
Ooh.
is similar, but there's also a bond in knowing that it's okay that you're different.
Well, and I like that word bond, right? Because that it's that connection that we feel with someone when they've been willing to open up and share a hardship, a trauma, being vulnerable, being open, being transparent. It allows us to relate to them at a completely different level.
Oh, yeah. If I had walked on that stage and said, hey, guys, I have 7 books, I'm on New York Times Square, like, look at me, how cool I am, not one person would have walked away connecting with
Yes.
me. But that vulnerability took my message to another level. It touched hearts, it caused positive ripples that, I mean, some of those people I still am connected with from Utah that, like, I'm sending my books out to their friends. And there's a bond that comes from that vulnerability that can't be created when you are operating out of the ego.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a whole nother conversation in itself.
Yes.
Um, and holy moly, that just brought up a bunch of things, but I don't want to get into that and go down that rabbit trail. We'll save that for another episode. So let's kind of bring this, because we can continue to talk about this for quite a while, right? Because there's so much on the topic. If you, from your years of experience with all the things that you've experienced and going through the process of healing and the process of learning how to be vulnerable and learning how to connect with people, for those individuals that might be listening, and again, the majority of our podcast listeners are business owners or in the business genre, but let's face it, we're going to take it home as well. What are some things? What's something that you would want to leave our audience with that could help them either on the journey or begin the journey or being willing to be open and vulnerable with those individuals around them?
This is another great question. You're full of them, Ed. I would suggest that tuning into your vulnerabilities, taking the opportunity to have a vulnerability and knowing what it is, and then utilizing that to either benefit yourself or someone else. A lot of times we're so afraid of what other people are going to think, but these vulnerabilities, they're kind of like the hidden treasures within ourselves, like these treasures teaching us what we would love to work on as far as healing. And I would like to challenge people of not being so afraid of being vulnerable, because like you said, like we can connect with our vulnerabilities, but at the same time, we don't want to overdo it to where it's like, look at me, I'm a victim, I'm operating out of this
Yeah,
sense of lack,
yeah,
or like you entitlement where you owe me something. I don't think that it's not supposed to be about operating from those types of places. It's really more about I would just say, like, explore your vulnerabilities. What are they trying to teach you?
Mm. And and how has it helped you to overcome? Right? Because I'm sure that there's an element of what's the word that I want? Of healing that comes through you being willing to share the trauma that's happened in your life.
Yes. So now I remember what I was going to say. Here's the nugget. Suppressing your trauma will not make it go away.
Ooh.
You really have to, Dr. Joe Dispenza tells us, if you really want a negative thought, feeling, or emotion to go away, you really have to reprogram your subconscious mind. That story will continue to play over and over unless you cultivate it. So don't just think by pushing your trauma or your pain or your fear or your vulnerabilities down that they're going to go away. I know it seems like a little bit of a double standard, but you're going to feel pain being stuck and you're going to feel pain growing. Which one would you choose?
Always growing.
Exactly. So.
And as I say that, there have been times in my life where I've sat in the pain and was like, I'm just so worn out. I don't feel like getting up and going through it. Now, obviously, that again can go in a whole nother conversation. But where the reason that I brought that up is no matter where you are, try to walk through it. Try to, like you said, meet it where it's at and go through it. Don't just let it control and take over your life.
And have grace with yourself. Remember that teacher is in there talking to you, and you're going to be going through this situation either way. Which teacher do you want walking you through it? If you can walk yourself through it with compassion, grace, forgiveness, people forget to forgive themselves sometimes. You didn't expect whatever happened to you to come into your life. Most likely the obstacles and challenges we didn't even see coming. So give yourself a little credit. Acknowledge the things that you've accomplished. Like, look at all the things we do on a daily basis, and we remember the one thing that we messed up on. Always. But we did 5,000 things right that day. Just honor yourself. Like, yes, growth is part of the journey, but sometimes, like you said, there's periods where we run and there's periods where we need rest. Honoring both.
Wow. Okay, Crystal, from this conversation, I'm going to come back and I'm going to listen to it again. And there's probably 3 or 4 more sub-conversations from things that we talked about. I am so glad and so fortunate to have you with us today as our listeners. And for our listeners, don't forget, Crystal has a phenomenal book called Crystal Clear Mindset. I will put the link to that on Amazon down below. So feel free to click on it. It's absolutely fantastic. You won't regret it. And again, in this element of vulnerability, be willing to open up. And you know what? First and foremost, be willing to be vulnerable with yourself. That's where it starts, right?
Yes.
And again, Crystal, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to having you back with us.
Yes. Well, you're stuck with me now, Ed. I'm a director. You're going to be seeing lots more of this space.
Which is fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. And for our listeners, thank you for joining us. Again, make sure you pick up the book or click on the button in down below in the show notes to make sure you order that book. And if you happen to be around Crystal, make sure you grab it and she'll sign it for you. She did mine. I'm so excited. But Crystal, again, thank you for joining us. We look forward to having you again for another great conversation. And thank you for sharing with us even a little bit of your story and your pain and being vulnerable with us today, with me, with our audience.
Always here to help BNI and support the community that we're building. So thank you for having me, Ed. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And to our listeners, thank you. We look forward to seeing you back with us next week with another wonderful guest. So
Thanks
enjoy
for tuning
the rest
in.
of your day. Oh, yeah. Have a great day.
This episode of the BNI San Diego Podcast has been brought to you by Cruise Productions, a San Diego-based video production company and proud BNI member. You can find us at the intersection where business and creativity meet, or online at cruiseproductionsinc.com.